All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first roundtable for the month of October. I hope you all are very excited for today's topic. We are going to be talking about health, wellness, and discussing mental health in the classroom. I have three lovely panelists here who I would love to get the opportunity to introduce themselves. And then we're going to go ahead and get started with all of the questions that we have prepared. So, whoever would like to start, you all are more than welcome to go ahead and get started.
Allison, you want to go? And Leslie?
Sure, I can go ahead. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Allison Asarch. I am one of the psychologists on staff at the Counseling Center, and I'm also our coordinator for consultation and outreach services.
Leslie, you're on mute.
Leslie, you're muted.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Kraft. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Terrapin Strong Education Director out of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I am also a mental health first aid instructor on campus, and I am a member of the Mental Health Coalition Steering Committee.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm so happy to be here with my two great colleagues. I'm Warren Kelly. I'm Senior Associate Vice President for Student Affairs. In my job, I oversee our team well-being, so it includes the Counseling Center and the Health Center, Accessibility and Disability Services, Recreation and Wellness. I've also chaired a task force on mental health recently, and we've had lots of outcomes and work related to that I'd like to at least make you aware of as we talk about the rest of the time we have together.
All right, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, panelists. And for anybody who is attending here with us on this meeting, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll make sure to address them to our panelists as we continue. We do have some questions that are pre-planned. But I want to go ahead and give Dr. Kelly and Dr. Ashik an opportunity to kind of talk through like the mental health landscape and some of the resources that the Counseling Center offers as well before we hop into the panel.
Sure. Well, I'll go ahead and go first, Allison, and then turn it over to you. I think I have a couple of notes here, and I don't want to drone too much about my notes. But first, I really appreciate talking to the UNIV instructors. I think you're a critical population of faculty that engage with our entering students in a way that really can establish they're sort of getting on the ground in a good way and getting them situated so that they can move forward. So the work is really valuable, and I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about that. I'm going to just share a couple of big kind of landscape issues around mental health on the campus so you're aware. And you can always feel free to contact me directly if you want to talk about some of them more. I mentioned that we had a mental health task force. This was launched by the Provost, Provost Rice and Vice President Perillo. There were probably 20 people on our task force, and we covered about a year and a half worth of work, and we had deans on it and experts in the mental health world and a number of academic colleagues connected to it, just people across the campus. If I name them, you'd know many of the names and understand how broad and beautiful the group was and how much expertise we had. Here's some just things I would just kind of share as broad observations. We studied internally the landscape of our campus around mental health for both students, faculty, and staff. And then we looked externally at what's going on around the country just to situate ourselves in terms of what we see. Here's just a tidbit. Across the country for a few years now, measurements have shown for mental health of college students in the United States to be around 40 to 44% levels of clinically diagnosable levels of depression and 35 to 37% levels of clinically diagnosable levels of anxiety. So just start there as kind of a marker to understand how significant the mental health challenges have been for our students coming into college and going through it. And I would mention loneliness is something we've been thinking about. You can talk about belonging and loneliness as sort of these kind of connected issues. And one thing that I know the Counseling Center here and across the country they see is an anxiety, the significant increase in social anxieties. Young people who are having great difficulty, not just finding friends and making connections, but internally having great difficulty even doing that. And we see that as well. So one of the things we have done, just lead into for Allison about the counseling side of this, the mental health side, is we've increased the number of clinicians on our campus 48% in the last 3 years. So we obviously understand the significant need for professionals to be available for our student population. And so we've been doing that. And for example, we've increased the number of intakes. We've doubled them in the recent past. So students can be seen quicker, and they can be seen in modalities that are far more beneficial in lots of ways that the Counseling Center has been able to achieve through its great work related to clinical care. At the same time, realizing that on our campus and across the country, in general, about 12% of the students on any campus are seen by mental health professionals in any given year. 12% on that campus, right? That's wonderful. It's a critical need, and that's the care we want to provide. That also says 88% of our students, or 85, if you will, aren't being seen in mental health clinical care settings. And so when we think about the level of depression, anxiety, and stress that students come into a college environment with, and the hope and excitement and the desire for a new chapter in their life, that we need to think about that broadly within the community. And that's where UNIV courses become critical places of intersection with students as they walk in the door. And we looked in the task force at these transition experiences, and we see a lot of that in the national literature, and we see it on our campus. For example, on our campus, just to touch on again on the topic of loneliness, and I think in 2016, our campus assessment working group out of IRPA-COG measured loneliness, and they found about 5% of students saying they were lonely who were just entering, beginning student survey, right? In 2022, the same survey found 23%, I believe, saying they were lonely. Now, the questions were slightly different. For the data people, we need to worry about this, right? It was lonely and isolated for the 16 study. It was lonely for the 22 study. But clearly was representing an increase in the degree to which students were saying, I am lonely, and I feel it, right? Loneliness is a subjective, it's not being alone. You can be alone and not feel lonely. It's a subjective feeling of a student feeling like I am lonely, right? And so it's been going up. We know that's true too. So what that led us to on the task force side in the campus is push toward ways to engage students in facilitating their connection with others. So for example, we have 700 student organizations on our campus. There are more than 20,000 students who are connected to those student organizations. And they cover, if you look at the list, they cover everything in the world you can imagine. So just think about students getting engaged with others who are either like them, have shared lived experiences, or have passions in the same territory. So they immediately find a place to connect with others who they don't know and find a home. And more than 20,000 do, right? So that's one way to think about entering students as ways to find them a ground and a home. More than 12,000 of our students participate in club sports and intramural sports. So students are oriented toward that direction. It's again a place to find a team and get engaged with others in a way that's both what they want to do, play soccer, or whatever it is, and engage with others in that kind of setting. 96% of our entering students go into our res halls, right? Our new incoming freshmen. So that's a population right there that's in an environment where we can enhance and support their connection with others. I think 40 to 50%, I think it's more in that range, maybe 45%, are in living learning programs. So they're already entering a space where there's structure around both their learning environment and their living environment that's built in to create connections with others around them. And so what I'm really mentioning by saying all this about the landscape is these are the big structures we see and processes on our campus where we can think about how to engage at scale students in ways that can connect them with others. Now, this whole issue of transition, we were looking at, and we came across a program called Radical Health. It's a good program. It's a free program offered by a family that created a foundation because their son died by suicide, and they wanted to create a program that enables students coming into campus to get exposed to other students in small settings, to be taught by a peer, a cohort peer, to learn coping skills, to learn better interrelationship skills, and also to understand that they're not alone. What they're experiencing is normal, right? And so that's what Radical Health was meant to do. It was a great turnkey program. We brought it on the campus and piloted it in Carolina community in I have to go back a few years. I think spring of fall of 22. We piloted in the College Park Scholars in spring of 24. And now we've rolled it out to the whole Carolina community in fall of 24. In fact, Leslie is one of the idea instructors in that program. And it's been, I think, a good experience for us to engage in that kind of idea. So I'll circle back to that in one moment, just as a question to you all for maybe when we get to questions. And well, this gets me to UNIV kind of and we had some meetings, and Leslie and I met with, Tori, and, I had some other colleagues in the task force talking with orientation about how to think about these transition experiences and find ways to give instructors and provide students better ways to ground themselves and get connected. So we talked about some ideas, and so this is the part where I would say, whether it's now or whether it's later, loving to get your thoughts about that. Like, what would that look like if we could provide tools and support for UNIV instructors around this topic? It could be a lesson plan, like a turnkey lesson plan that you're provided. We could even think about providing trained student peer educators who could come in and teach those lesson plans for you, but a way to integrate it within your actual course. Radical Health has now been embedded in the ideas course in Carillon community in such a way that it actually is the course class for several sessions. And it's another way to embed it. It's a larger program, right? It's 4 classes. So it's a lot of time, but it's another way to embed something directly into a program. And lastly, I think I'd just like to mention the mental health website that we have. And can I do that real just quickly, Selah? Okay, I'm going to just real quickly, like, I'm not going to take you through this, but if you haven't seen this website, we took a month in August. We stood this whole thing up in a month in August and launched it under Dr. Pines' request to be on this campus for the beginning of the fall semester. It's as comprehensive as we could do in a month, but it's about mental health and well-being. And what it does is it takes you either to undergraduate students or faculty and staff or parents and families. It provides some, general statistics about our investments in mental health. It provides featured initiatives that we have that many people aren't aware of, like our Center for Healthy Families is a gem of a program over in the School of Public Health. The Mental Health Awareness Week is coming up, for example. And then a rolling calendar of ways to engage. I bring this up because I think what I would love to know from UNIV instructors is, first, if you were able to go take a look at this website and see what kinds of resources it provides for undergraduate students and your interactions with them about what you think could be helpful. Like, I'm in crisis. I need counseling, right? These are things students can click on and right away know what to do. What kind of advice would you give us about this site to be helpful to your students or to you? We could look at modifying this website. Marketing Communications developed it. It was a rush. We got it done. And we're looking for feedback during the fall semester so we can modify it over the winter break and roll it out again. And so that'd be a great place to hear what you think about how I could support you in your interaction with students. So I'm going to stop there and go ahead and turn it over to Allison. Is that the thing to do, Selah? Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Warren. And I appreciate, there were things I even didn't know about that I learned from hearing you talk just now. And, as we're thinking about the different systems and the apparatuses that we have on campus that can bring in more opportunities for students to, be focusing on their mental health or aspects for which we can engage them in belonging. Another thing that I really want to highlight is even outside of these systems, what all of us as staff and faculty on this campus can do. Because we really like to think of our campus as a community of care. And so what that means is that we all can play a role in helping students to feel like they belong, to feel like they are improving their mental health. It doesn't only have to be those who are have degrees related to providing clinical services. And so I also want to share some of the resources that we have for expanding this community of care so that we all can feel like we can do something, even if it doesn't fit, the training that you have and things like that. There are ways that all of us can be involved in helping our students that fit what we're able to provide, because certainly nobody's asking you all to do the work of a therapist or a counselor. We certainly don't want that, because that's not what your role is here. We want you to take the role that you have and learn some basic soft skills for how you can be more effective and have the knowledge that you need to then be able to be supportive to students within your role, not outside of it, because we want you to take on, you have the role you have for a reason, and we want you to be effective in that and being able to support students. So I just want to share a few resources that exist for that before we get started, but some of the questions might touch on this too. So I apologize if that ends up being repetitive, but first I want to mention that there are actually live trainings that we have on campus so that you can help students, to learn more about how can I be useful in helping students. And the cool thing is that we actually have a variety of levels. That's really not the right word, but I can't think of a better word, of these trainings. And so if all you can really devote is an hour of your time, that's perfect, because we have a helping students in distress training that really gets into some of the basics about what's helpful in terms of like something that you can say, something that you can notice if somebody is struggling, a really just broad overview of what you need to know when you're considering how students might be experiencing mental health challenges. But then from there, we have more in-depth trainings too. So our training to evaluate, respond to, and prevent suicide for CHIRPS, which stands for CHIRPS for CHIRPS. That's what I'm going to call it for the rest of the time, but I wanted you to know what it stood for. CHIRPS for CHIRPS is a 3-hour in-depth suicide prevention training that's geared specifically toward the college campus community and offers a really nice, interactive, and in-depth approach for faculty and staff to understand more about recognizing signs of mental health distress and how you can best talk with students about it. And if you have even more time, mental health first aid is one of the programs on our campus where it's an 8-hour in-depth training that gets into some of that recognition of signs of suicidal risk or just mental health concerns and what you do and how you manage that. And so whatever kind of time commitment you're able to give, there is something for you to learn how to be trained. And you can always start from the lowest commitment and just build up over your time here if that's something that you want to do. And we also have resources available as well outside of the trainings too, like our Helping Students in Distress manual, which is available on the Counseling Center website, the red folder, which I know that you can find on the mental health .umd.edu website currently. So there's a lot of different resources for you to be thinking about how can I be helpful for students. All of those things are specific to your role in you helping students. They're not actually for students, they're for you all. And the last option that I'll mention, and this is more of a like individual case kind of resource, is the Counseling Center Warm Line. So if you are experiencing a student who might be struggling with their mental health, you're not sure what to do, and you have questions and you want to consult about it with a mental health professional, you can just call the Counseling Center and ask for the Warm Line, and somebody will call you back so that you can talk through the specific situation and make sure that whatever steps that you're taking feel like the right fit and give you some guidance on what else you can do to be helpful. But the Counseling Center isn't the only resource for that. There's also the Dean of Students office, which houses the Beta team. You can always Google Beta UMD to learn more about that, and the care team. So there are a lot of resources on campus that are like specifically putting things out there for you to be helpful for students so that we can really have this community of care. So that's what I wanted to mention about that, but I know there's probably a lot of questions to get into, so I won't take any more time on that one.
All right. Thank you both so much for that nice foundation of information that I believe will be helpful for like kind of giving more context for all the questions that we have planned for today. For all of our lovely participants who we have here who are UNIV100 instructors, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll make sure to read them aloud to our lovely panelists. We do have some pre-planned questions as well that I want to make sure we get to, but I just want to make sure that everyone feels prepared. I'm going into this next few weeks, next few months of the semester when handling their UNIV100 sections. So the first question that I have is going to kind of fall under Counseling Center services, but if anyone else has any more like general responses, please feel free to share as well. But Allison, you spoke very briefly about some of the services offered by the Counseling Center. Do you mind sharing some information about those that are like the most utilized by students or by faculty and staff for students?
Sure, yeah. And so what I've shared about that's provided by the Counseling Center so far is specifically for faculty and staff to help students. But then of course, our sort of bread and butter, so to speak, is the services that we provided to students. And so I can share a little bit about that as well, so that you know what students can expect when they come to visit us. And so we offer a few different ways for students to kind of get into our services and have an initial visit with us. One way is that students can just schedule a brief assessment appointment. They can do that by calling or by coming in and talking to our front desk to schedule that. Something to know for students right now is that we don't have online scheduling. Might be something we look into in the future, but students might ask about that. And so it's just something to be aware of for right now. But when there are students who feel that they cannot wait for a scheduled appointment, we have urgent visits available. And those are same day visits where students might wait up to an hour or something around there to be seen, and they'll get seen right then and there. We don't define for a student what an urgent concern is. That's something that is self-defined. So if they tell us that it's urgent, or if they tell us that they cannot wait for a scheduled appointment, then we take them at their word for that. So those would be really helpful things to let students know about. The other thing that I really want to make sure that we share with students when we're giving information about the counseling center is that the services are free. I've gotten a lot of information over the years where I hear about students not coming in for services because they indicate that it isn't affordable to them. And that's the barrier for them seeking help. And I feel so sad when I hear about that, because our services are free. And so I don't want them to think that they're not free and then not come and get the help that they need. So as much as you can help us dispel that myth, we want to make sure every student knows that our services are free, and so that financial concern should not be a barrier in any way to seeking help with us. We offer a number of different types of services, and it's not only individual counseling. Students often will come in thinking that that's the thing that makes the most sense for them, and we actually might determine that a different type of service might better fit the type of concerns that they're experiencing. And so we like for students to come in with an open mind about what's going to be the right fit for them, because we actually have a lot of different services like group therapy, evidence-based workshops. We have help with referral off campus when that's a better fit for students. And so we would love help when recommending the counseling center to just have students keep in mind that it's not just that they're going to come and start individual therapy, that we really do a thorough assessment of what's going on for them before we determine what the next step is, because we don't want to take a one-size-fits-all approach. We really want it to be tailored to their needs.
All right. Thank you so
Simon.
much for that very in-depth. And Warren, you can go. I see you're unmuted, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to that wonderful sort of comprehensive picture, we for your instructors, we also have behavioral health services in our health center. So we have psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners, and then the pitch for the website is that if a student thinks that what they need is consideration for medication, they can go directly there and make an appointment and be seen by basically a physician or a psychiatric nurse practitioner. There are also therapists that support the process of somebody getting medications as well as connected therapy, and so that's something they can do as well. And just in terms of experiences students are having, substance abuse or substance use, if that's their concern, there's also a unit over there with an addiction physician, medical specialist who can help them with that process as well. And then unfortunately it is sort of the life we live, but that if a student is a survivor of sexual assault or relationship violence, we also have a unit over in the health center that is very open to confidential based conversations and even therapy related to students that need that kind of care.
All right. Thank you so much. I think that was very important to kind of highlight just the different resources and the different locations across campus that students can find the support in. So I do want to kind of lead a little bit more into that in more of like a referral sense. So I was wondering if you all could talk about some of the key skills that might come about when talking to students about mental health. We know that like these are concerns that come across, but how can our faculty and staff encourage students to take advantage of all of these resources that we have available?
I can start. I think there's a lot of different skills. That's why we offer these whole trainings for them. But I would say like the two that come to mind most are well, one I'll put in the frame of connect before you redirect, meaning that it is so helpful when talking with students, not just to help them solve the problem by, let's say, referring them to a resource or telling them what they can do next, but by first offering some empathy and support. And so, one really helpful way of doing that is when you're in a conversation with a student and they're sharing about their experiences, to kind of just paraphrase or summarize the things that you are hearing them say. It's something that we don't actually do that often in conversations in our everyday lives, but when we do, what we find is that not only does it help us to really get on the same page with the other person, because if the thing that we paraphrased or summarized isn't accurate, maybe we misheard it, which we all mishear things all the time. Then we can get on the same page if we weren't. It helps us know if we weren't. But the other thing that it provides is it really offers the person that we're talking with a sense of validation, of being heard and being understood. And so I can't recommend enough this idea of paraphrasing or summarizing the things that you're hearing in conversation, which again is going to be that approach to connect before you redirect. And the second thing that came to mind is how helpful it is to normalize the idea of seeking help. We've made such great strides with reducing stigma about seeking treatment over the years, but that doesn't mean that we don't have room to grow in that, and that doesn't mean that there aren't students who are going to be really nervous or maybe even feel a sense of shame about the idea of seeking help. And so as much as we can normalize it, whether that looks like just reminding the student how many students use these services to the point that we were in so much demand that we needed a lot more people to offer the services. Or if you have a personal experience that you feel very open to sharing, no pressure to, but maybe sharing your own experience of seeking help or somebody that was close to you, how they had an experience with that, really normalizing the process can be so useful.
Another skill to think about is just you know, Allison talked about validating and normalizing the experience. I think it's also important for us to be really cautious about how we validate in a way that is non-judgmental, right? So when a student tells us what's going on with them, you might have some kind of gut reaction like, that's not that big of a deal, or something like that that comes up for you, right? And we want to be really careful and pay a lot of attention to ourselves and how we are reacting internally to what somebody is saying. Because anything that somebody is struggling with, right, the feelings that they're sharing with you are real, right? Those are their real feelings, their real experiences. And it's really important for us to honor those, right? And to not make a student feel like they shouldn't be feeling whatever it is that they're feeling. So that's another important way for us to establish that connection, I think, with the student, even if we know that we're going to end up doing a referral. It's just to make sure that we know that we do not have a negative judgment. This does not change the way that we view them as a human because they're having a problem, those kinds of things, and just taking those concerns seriously and letting the student know that we see them, right? And we hear that they're that these things are serious for them, and just believing that, right? I think that's an important component too.
I'd like to add to what Leslie just said. It's so important, normalizing that whatever their experience is, what their experience. I won't repeat what you said, Leslie, but this is the way it was framed to me by a student. In the mental health space, because there's a mental health crisis, and because we've staffed up around the country and here as well, there's a counter conversation about have we pathologized the experience of living, right? So if I have an argument with you and it makes me feel bad, now I feel bad. Is that something I should seek counseling support for? If I've argued with my parents or somebody that, is as well, or a roommate, or so this question, are we pathologizing experiences that we need to help students in other ways learn how to cope with, just as we've learned how to cope in our own lives? Of course. At the same time, this was the comment from the student. They said, how do you know what the inner experience is going on related to this? We can categorize and say, yes, you've had a traumatic experience and that's a reason to go. Oh, you've had this experience arguing with somebody you care about, and that's not. How do you know, right? Because in that student, that could be a significant triggering event that relates to their difficulty in life. And so we can't judge. The only other thing I would mention, and Allison got at this, is that the stigma thing is interesting. There is no question the stigma among young people today is far, far less than it was in generations going back. At the same time, when they measure it, students will say in anonymous surveys where they don't need to perform, they'll say, I hold very little negative thoughts about somebody seeking help. Like it's a trivial amount, like 6%, 2%, something like that. But the same question of, I think others will perceive, negatively is like skyrocketing. It's like 80, whatever. So the perception that I don't feel any kind of negative thoughts about somebody seeking help, but I think the world out there does. It turns out when you think about it from that perspective, well, who is that world they're talking about? It's other students who feel the same way they do.
Wow. Thank you all so much for such a wide variety of feedback and things like that. Hopefully the instructors are kind of consuming this and being able to kind of implement this into their classes. I'm going to kind of skip around in terms of like the way that I structured the questions originally, because it seems like we're talking a lot about like best practices for supporting students. So I definitely want to kind of continue with that train of thought as we continue with this. So I just want to talk, how can our instructors prepare for having conversations about mental health in the classroom? I know a lot of times we're kind of focusing on these one-on-one instances where students are coming to the instructors, but with the fall coming up and the seasons changing, I know we wanted to look at some of the preventative measures that our instructors can kind of take with midterms and finals and things like that kind of coming up.
I think one component would be, and I think it's a little sort of connected to some of the things that we've been saying, is that, everything doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have therapy. There's also some regular community support or other types of resources available. And so one way we can talk about this is to not only talk about one type of resource, right? So I think that a great way to have this conversation with students is to talk more holistically about well-being and the different types of resources, especially when we're thinking about stigma. Maybe somebody's not ready to go to the counseling center, but there are other types of resources they would be open to, that sort of thing. So trying to keep that conversation broad so that students can see that there's a wide range of things that could serve them, right? So we talked about all these clubs and organizations. Some students are coming here and they're surrounded by people who do not look like them, who do not come from similar backgrounds from them, right? So one thing that we can do is really help students to find the resources, the clubs and organizations, the spaces on our campus that are affinity spaces, right? Places where they can find those connections with other folks who might have some similar cultural experiences behind them. We have a lot of students coming here from really strong religious communities that they used to be a part of, and coming here now that might be missing for them when they first start here. So encouraging students to take advantage of the amazing chaplains that we have from all of these different faith backgrounds, in addition to the different student organizations that support students' faith experiences, can be really an important component that can supplement, right? A lot of the other kinds of mental health care somebody could require, or could just start giving people that community and that sense of support that they need, and maybe then they don't require, right, clinical care. Same thing with resources from places like recreation and wellness, right? We mentioned students participating in intramurals, but there's tons of opportunities for people to take place or to participate in things that encourage them to have better physical wellness. We have nutritionists at the health center. We have massage and acupuncture available at the health center. They do meditation. There's a program called WAGs for Wellness that they offer that gives students an opportunity to spend time with dogs, right? Which can be very therapeutic for people. So I think trying to really provide a spectrum of available options for students can really give them an opportunity to connect with the things that would matter to them, and could be very preventative, especially if, as we're saying, they're coming in from an entirely different life they were living 6 months ago, right? Where they may have had a lot of these different types of supports. They may have their own dog they're missing. We have WAGs for Wellness so that they can at least spend time for a dog, right? Again, they may be missing that faith community. We have those resources here. So what are the other things that we can kind of wrap around our students to help them see all these different aspects in our community of care?
I really like that idea. And another thing that I was thinking about too, when we're thinking about the idea of how you have conversations with students in the classroom about this generally versus like one-on-one conversations. I think for me, the thing that comes up is that, I think a lot of times we're sort of trying to present ideas in this like perfect way to people. And I would be more focused on just mentioning it, even if it doesn't come out the perfect way, even if you forgot half of the resources that Leslie mentioned, even if like you didn't say it in the most sensitive possible way that every student would be like, this is the best thing I ever heard. I think that sometimes we end up avoiding bringing up some of these topics because it's scary sometimes to put ourselves out there and to know that you know, even though we're in the position of power usually here, like students can offer a lot of feedback to us about what we do, and that can be a little bit anxiety provoking. But I think it's not even so much like necessarily what specifically you say about reminding students about mental health, but the fact that you said it that makes such a difference. Because when somebody even brings up the topic of mental health, that automatically is going to help reduce stigma. That automatically places in the person's mind that that's something that you think is important, and that might be something that they should think is important. And so my recommendation too is to let go of any expectations you have for yourself about how you talk about it, if that might get in the way of talking about it.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up. In some ways, it's a question to my colleagues, Allison and Leslie, because you are experts. It was framed sort of this way. Marissa Franco is an instructor on our campus. She's written the best-selling book, Platonic, about belonging. And we've consulted with her about sort of ways we might use, you know, sort of her knowledge and experience to help us in our environments. And one thing she observed, she said, is kind of a conundrum, right? It's we want students to reach out and connect with others. And we find lots of ways to present that to them to do so. But the students that, in fact, are having the greatest difficulty, let's say somebody with social anxiety, have the least capacity to do that. And so, so she said her observation, or her just musing about it, was, you know, trying to, are there ways to sort of proactively go after those students, if you will, like give them a greater opportunity to get connected in a way that isn't what I would call sort of the passive exposure to the, you know, to the menus and potentials. And what I guess I wonder about that, you know, is if an instructor is seeing or noting students who seem really reserved and reticent and really struggling in a way, should they proactively, you know, sort of just inquire how they're doing or something? Or is that sort of this idea of what's in my realm as a faculty member versus what, you know, my invasion of someone else's privacy, right? Like, I don't know. So it's kind of a question. What do you think about that?
I get that question a lot when I'm doing these types of presentations for faculty and staff. Or even, I actually got a warm line call recently where an instructor had been reaching out to a graduate student who hadn't, after taking a leave of absence, was supposed to be back and hadn't come back. They had no idea where they were, and they emailed a couple of times, and they were like, I do think I should call. I'm afraid of like invading this person's privacy, which I just thought was fascinating to hear that they thought that the phone call would be an invasion of privacy. But yeah, I hear this idea a lot. And for me, I just feel so strongly in this idea of a community of care that I really am not on the side of it feeling like an invasion of privacy for somebody to be like, how you doing? Now, I think there are ways that we can push it a little bit. You know, if somebody is saying like, I'm fine, and then we're like, you don't look fine, you know, I think that might be pushing it a little bit. Or, you know, not sort of taking what somebody says at their word. So if they say they're okay, letting that be that way until maybe you have evidence otherwise, and then you might present that evidence. Well, I noticed you didn't come to the past 5 classes. Now you're sharing that rather than saying, no, you don't seem okay, and you know, denying what they tell you to be true for them. But I always think just asking somebody how they're doing in a sincere way is such a way to connect. Like, to me, that doesn't feel like a mental health check-in. That just feels like a way to get to know the people around us in our community better. And especially when we do it in a sincere way, you know, not the like passing ships in the night, how's it going? Good, how are you? Bye. You know, not that one, but in a real sincere way. I think it presents the opportunity, and then students can take that opportunity if they want or choose not to, and then can have that agency where it doesn't have to feel like an invasion of privacy, especially if we're not basing any sort of like, I really need you to tell me what's going on because I'm your professor, like if we're not doing that kind of thing, but just really, oh, I'm wanting to know more about what's going on for you. But if you don't feel like sharing, no worries. Then we allow them to still have their privacy and their agency while still opening the door for a connection. So that's my take on it. Others definitely might have a different take for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, keeping in mind that all you're doing, right, is setting the stage, right? You're just opening the door. So yeah, they might say they're fine, even though you're not fine and you're gonna let it know, but they're also letting them know that you are a person they could come back to if they change their minds. And so I think that that's a really important component too. Also think that just as human beings, we need to do better at trying to take care of each other and talk to each other and check in with each other anyway. And so if we are modeling that that's just the way that we behave, right? I just check on people because I care about people. Then you're also sending that message that it would be okay, right? For you to tell me something if you decide that you want to tell me something later, even if that's not right now. And I think, we can never guarantee that somebody's not going to get upset if we ask. But in my mind, I would always want to provide that opportunity because if they are looking for somebody to talk to, but they're feeling so badly that they don't know how to open up or they feel like they're your burden or something, and I present them a space, who knows, right? This might be the only opportunity that they have where they feel like somebody actually really wants to hear. And so I would rather have a student annoyed with me or whatever for asking them the question than not asking it and possibly missing that important opportunity.
That was a great question, Dr. Kelly. That wasn't even on my list, so I'm very happy that you asked it. Thank you so, so much for that. Both of you brought up some good points that I feel like I'm like trying to figure out which question I want to ask next as a result. But I think I'm gonna stick with like best practices for supporting students and then transition. So both of you talked about like when communicating different ways of like communicating with students and things like that. And Allison, I know that we had briefly talked about like skills such as like active listening and empathy. Are there any other key skills that you think are important for our instructors to kind of practice or engage with when working with students? Or if there's anything that you want to talk about that builds on top of active listening and providing empathy? And that's for everybody, by the way.
I think what both Leslie and I shared and a little bit of what Warren shared in that first question really covered a lot of some of those skills. And certainly if anyone comes to one of the trainings on campus, we'll like get more detail into those. So I'm not sure that I have anything to add about those two things, though. My colleagues might have other things to say, but one that I think is a skill that I will put out there, but we're not going to spend a lot of time with it now. And for this, you can go to any of those live trainings that I mentioned, whether it's the 1 hour helping students in distress or any of the other ones too, and they will get into these skills with a lot more detail. So please bear with me that it's going to be minimal that I'm providing here, but I think the skill of being able to ask difficult questions is a really important one. And so in the various trainings, the live trainings that we provide on campus, something that we actually talk about is the importance of being able to ask a question like, are you thinking about suicide or are you thinking about killing yourself? Because we know that there are a lot of students on campus who experience suicidal thoughts. And when we can ask that question of somebody who's really struggling and might have conveyed to us that they're thinking about suicide or that they're feeling extremely low or down, that question will help us know what type of intervention we want to provide. So again, I'm not going to go into all the levels of who do we refer to, when is an emergency, all of that stuff is going to come if you attend to any of those live trainings. But practicing asking difficult questions and tolerating the discomfort that comes with it, because it can be so uncomfortable sometimes to ask really specific and direct questions of students, or even just noting an observation that's uncomfortable, like saying that you seemed really irritable these past few times that we've met, versus saying like, oh, you seem like you're feeling some type of way which I think is a really common phrase these days, but I have actually no idea what that means. I think as we can become more comfortable with these uncomfortable observations or uncomfortable questions, that can make it a little bit easier to have these conversations, and feel like we might know a little bit about what to do if something more distressing arises.
All right. If no one has any other skills that they want to share, I kind of want to talk about something else that you all both had mentioned before, and that has to do with like being able to differentiate between like students' concerns. So we know that there's like routine concerns, urgent needs, and emergencies. Are there ways that instructors can like differentiate between these when like talking with students, or if they're noticing any behaviors that come up in class, whether that's like not like going from fully always attending class to not attending, like late submissions of assignments, that for someone who's typically on top of those things?
Yeah, I think that for I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking about like, is it possible to get into all of this at this time? Because this can be a whole topic of a training in and of itself, is how do you differentiate from somebody who's experiencing like even actually in our helping students in distress training, I'll share with you, we kind of differentiate between concerns that are just as Warren was saying, regular life experiences and emotions that we're not pathologizing, but just offering support to more routine concerns. Like I've been experiencing symptoms for a few weeks or a few months. I'm not experiencing any risk. And I'm not feeling that it's urgent, but I do want to get some help with this, to things that are more urgent and needing a little bit more of a rapid response, to things that are emergencies, where we would use our emergency services on campus to actually provide the help in that situation. And so there are many ways to differentiate these things and know what to do. And so I just don't know if there will be time to get into that. So I'll plug the trainings again, because I think that's a great place to learn more about that. But one thing that I do want to mention, as Warren was sharing a little bit about the mental health landscape, and the real investment in additional clinicians on campus, is when we think about the various levels, and we look at when something is an emergency, somebody needs immediate help at that moment because their life or somebody else's life might be in danger. We actually do now have clinicians who are responding with the police when there are mental health emergencies on campus. So it's called the Mental Health Emergency Assessment and Response Team, which we call MHEART, because we love acronyms on this campus. So MHEART consists of both the police officers who respond to the emergencies, as well as the counseling center clinician who joins them when the emergency is of a mental health nature. So I just wanted to make sure to share that, because there are some professors who might not know about that yet. That might help you feel a little bit more comfortable during an emergency, making that call to the police, because we know that a clinician will also be responsible.
Yeah, and I would also just go back to what Allison said. If there's a concern about someone's physical safety, about them leaving your presence and not being safe, or making a decision to attempt to take their own life or something like that, I mean, that's going to be your number one, right? That is a student you cannot walk away from, and you have to get help. And part of figuring that out might be having to ask one of those questions, right? Are you thinking about suicide? And so, yeah, these trainings will really give you an opportunity to practice that and learn more about it. But that's really what we're like when we're talking emergency. That's what we're talking about. If this person walks away, I don't know if they're going to be safe, right? And so that's really the main differentiator for you, is, can I let the student walk away? And so that would be kind of your number one like alert. Like, I need to get people involved in this situation right away. And then in other circumstances, you have all of these folks to consult. So if you think that the student is safe to leave, you can use that warm line at the counseling center. You can contact the data team and get some advice on where to go next, to make sure that you support the student and get a little bit of help figuring out kind of what level of intervention they need, as long as you feel like they're safe walking away. And like Allison said, these trainings will really help you feel confident in deciding how to get the student connected to resources. So I would recommend taking the time to carve out some space for them.
All right, and as we're slowly wrapping up, if there's any questions from our participants that they would like to ask, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll definitely ask them to our lovely panelists while we have them for a few more minutes. I think you all have really talked a lot about like these trainings and things like that. I think there's like one more thing that I kind of want to talk about briefly, and it's more so about referral to like some of these services. I know for me, I've had instances where I've had students come to me and I'm like, they want help, but they're scared to kind of go by themselves or things like that. So I was just wondering if you all would mind kind of sharing some information about that that might come up with some of our instructors as we're getting into more of these transition periods throughout the semester.
Allison, you probably have the greatest
Yeah,
answer.
sure. I'm trying to think, is the question more about like advice if a student wants somebody to kind of like be with them in the process and how
Yes.
to make that happen? Okay. I just want to make sure I understood correctly. Yeah, so that is absolutely something that we have uh, staff and faculty do a lot of times when a student is just wanting or needing a little bit more support. It is perfectly okay to walk a student over to the counseling center or to the behavioral health service if that is what they're needing. And to just kind of sit there with them through the process. I would say we unless there's a significant reason as to why this would be the case, we probably wouldn't have anybody join them in the session. But we've definitely had faculty and staff walk students over and sometimes wait with them. Other ways that faculty and staff have offered that support, because sometimes, especially if the concern doesn't feel urgent, you might just not have the availability in your schedule to do something like that. But other things are calling together. Like, will you be with me when I call to make my appointment? Because if the concern that somebody has isn't urgent, like they don't need the appointment right away, walking them over is really just to then schedule the appointment. Whereas maybe you do that in your office together, where you can call together on speakerphone. Or sometimes it's just about going on the website. Maybe that's the mentalhealth.umd.edu website to see what service is going to be the best fit, or maybe it's the counseling center website if you know you're going to refer over there and they want to look like, who are the people there? Do they look nice? And what's that first step that I'm going to take? So maybe you go on the website together just to take a look and answer any questions that the student has. So there are ways to offer that support if somebody feels maybe a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit skittish about seeking help, and just a little extra of a warm handoff would be useful there.
The only thing I would add, that is it, that's the core. But for the instructors to know that in our health center, we see 30,000 clinical visits a year, and they've integrated behavioral health and clinical services primary care in such a way that if a student shows up in the clinical setting in the health center, there will be a consultation possibly between that physician or that PA or that nurse practitioner with a mental health professional right there at that time, right? And so there's a follow-up. So it's another way where students really talking about the headaches they're having or the stomach ache, and it doesn't, but it could really be a mental health issue. Going to the health center can also get them into care. The other one is dean of students. Sometimes it's, about their needs, their essential needs of food or security, and a referral to the dean of students is a real connection right into the mental health environment if the dean of students office sees that's necessary.
All right, so as we wrap everything up, I just want to ask one last question. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our instructors, a tip or a trick that you think would be helpful for them as they kind of navigate the rest of the semester with their UNIV 100 class?
I mean, if my expert colleagues don't have something right away to say, one thing I would say is, is to the instructors, take care of yourself. It's always a challenging time, and there's some clear challenges and difficulties around the current environment we're in. And we feel that we're human beings as well, and so seek that care in whatever way works for you with people that you know and trust and respect to talk to. We have a faculty staff assistance program with clinicians who actually will see you if you'd like to go over and visit them. They're in the health center as well. So yeah, just take care of yourself as well.
I think my tip would be to take a look at something related to how to be supportive to students, even if you can't do one of the trainings your schedule doesn't allow, or you're wanting to do this or that and it feels like it feels overwhelming. Rather than not doing anything, just see if you can get on the mentalhealth.umd.edu website, just to take a look, and maybe you give yourself 5 minutes there, or maybe all you do is download the red folder and have it right there on your office wall, just in case you need it. But, I know that sometimes I do this, especially that I want to, approach some way of doing something kind of in its full capacity. And then because I don't have the time to do that, then I don't do it at all. And so I encourage, if that's something that you tend to do, instead of that all or nothing approach, start with the smallest possible thing. Like, can you look at the homepage of one of the websites just to see what's there? And then you can build things up over time to get more familiar with some of these resources and skills.
Alrighty. If no one else has anything that they would like to share, I want to thank all of our lovely panelists so much for taking the time to be here and answer all of these questions. I know it took a lot of time out of your day, so thank you so much for your support during this time and helping our UNIV100 instructors kind of prepare for this next part of the semester. If anybody does have like any additional questions or concerns that they didn't want to ask during this time, please feel free to send them over to our transition programs email, and then I'll be happy to relay this information over to our panelists and hopefully get a good response for you. But I just want to thank everybody so much for being here today. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and you all have a safe weekend. I will see probably some of you all soon. If not, have a great rest of your semester as well. But this is a formal close to our roundtable for the first one of October. You all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having
everybody.
us, Sheila.
Bye-bye.